live in an economic system where commodification has always been a process. For a very short period, actually, in the middle of the 20th century, restraints and even corrections were put on commodification. But this was a project which depended on a particular historical circumstance and a particular balance of social forces. What we've seen in the last few decades is, I think, three processes I would emphasize. First of all, neoliberalism, the notion that it's not up to governments to interfere with market forces. And this has been a process which has been reinforced in many ways by the European Union, and particularly the Troika with its involvement in the deficit countries. Secondly, globalization, which has removed a lot of the economic forces which shape labour markets from the control of national institutions and national governments in particular. And thirdly, financialization, which has released the enormous potential of different economic processes which are far removed from those that existed in the 19th and even early 20th century from social control. And putting these together, they've radically reshaped the whole terrain in which employment takes place. What has been noticeable is that every movement provokes a counter-movement, and there have been a wide range of reactions, both from traditional trade unions and from other kinds of social and political movements which are outside our traditional understanding of labour movement actors. Some of these movements have been very progressive and have come up with imaginative new proposals and demands for correcting commodification. And as part of this process, given that commodification extends to the whole environment, the whole ecosystem, in particular the environmental movements which have captured the imagination of younger people in particular, there have also been reactions of a much more reactionary and destructive kind. One can think of many such examples here in Italy, of course, but across Europe and across the world more generally, than the idea that one should blame the sufferings and the precariousness of modern workers on an enemy such as migrants, or such as liberals, or such as progressives in general. This has also caught a great deal of root, and in many countries, unfortunately, the more reactionary kinds of protest have proved more successful in capturing ideas than have the more progressive forms. So this is a struggle, a battle that those of us who believe in a progressive social order and a progressive kind of labour relations still have to fight even more intensely. They have to work together, and very often, and for good reasons perhaps, there is a lot of mutual suspicion. Trade unions often see new social movements as having no democratic mandate. Those involved in new social movements often argue that trade unions are old-fashioned. They represent those who are still relatively protected in the labour market, and that they're not interested in the concerns in particular of young precarious workers. And unions in many countries have been trying to react effectively to this agenda to say that we are not there just for the old secure workers, but for the new insecure ones as well. And we have to try to win rights for them to become more secure, less precarious. But I think it's not just a question of changing the demands and the constituency. There's a difference in language, a difference in modes of action. There has to be a mutual learning process, I think, in which each side, unions on the one side, new social movements on the other, have to look at perhaps what is weak, what is outdated in their own approach, and what is perhaps the strength of the approach of the other side, and to come up with a mutual understanding based on mutual respect. And if I could end by citing one example, some of the audience perhaps will be familiar with the film Pride, which was made about the miners' strike, in which a group of gay and lesbian activists in London became involved in the miners' dispute in support of their demands and in support of their jobs. And there was a high degree of mutual suspicion on both sides, but what that film showed was, I think, a very positive and encouraging example of the way in which mutual learning is possible and the way in which mutual respect can lead to outcomes which are beneficial for both sides of the argument.